That's enough music for now, lads. Looks like there's dirty work afoot.
Hi, welcome to Disc 5 of the Mothman's Photographer. We assume this is going to be the last disc in the series. It's December 18th, 2005. We've been at this for 4 years now. So, hoping this is the end of this phase of the project as we move into doing a photo book of a photo series that I did in 1981 that relates to the work that I did starting in 2001 after the World Trade Center attacks. Actually, before that, when I turned 40, I remembered, I've always had this in the back of my head from my early precognition of 911. There was also a message that when I was 40, I really needed to start focusing on my art career, and that within a few years I would, quote, make it. So I started that in 1999 with the trip to, the WTO was really the first. I just basically started putting more money into real equipment for my photography and filmmaking, and sacrificing more for that in a real way. And unfortunately at the WTO, I didn't really have a good camera. I just couldn't really afford it at that time, but it was a magical sort of set of circumstances where everything went perfectly, except for getting gassed and being sick in bed for 5 weeks. You know, those are some of the, I'm sure a lot of other people were sick for many weeks as well, and these were claims that were never made for the city. Most of the money for the millions of dollars that did go out went to businesses downtown who suffered minor exterior damage to their buildings. Those of us who lost weeks of work, didn't get anything. But at that time, I also took a trip to right after the World Trade Center. Took a trip to Mexico. Met the shaman who apparently opened my third eye, as they say. Took a trip to Egypt in 2000 with Robert Godby, who we met earlier in the series, where I had I almost died at the pyramids. I almost fell into a 300-foot deep well shaft. The McVeigh execution was another thing that occurred right around there, where interestingly I met a man who had been at the Martin Luther King assassination, who gave a rousing speech at the McVeigh execution. But then I found out that he had been seen in the car with the CIA agent that had infiltrated Martin Luther King's entourage. And then when you look at all the other things that happened there at the McVeigh execution, such as the agent provocateurs that were there, who looked like G. Gordon Liddy, both of them, and the way that they Christianized the vigil that we were having in a very loud and obnoxious way, and just in the way that people were photographed by the FBI before we could go into the prison. You can see that favors were given to the to the pro-death penalty people, and the anti-death penalty people were harassed. And in the case of the WTO, we found that a woman, I filmed a woman who said that the Starbucks smashing that had made the national news had been set up in advance by police informants or police infiltrators into the black-clad Eugene protesters group. So this flurry of activity that had been sort of, I guess, programmed into me by this phenomenon back in 1967 did yield fruit. It may not be the kind of fruit that a mass audience is looking for, but I think it's important. Truth. Also in 2002 we had the energy field event, which we have included in a CD. Let me show you the CD. Okay, here's the CD, which we are including in the, this is the image, an image I took in 1978 during the Mothman flap. We seem to have these flaps in West Virginia whenever there's a, how do you say, in 67 there was a big increase in political assassinations. In 78 there were as well, because, in 77, because of the Senate looking into the assassinations, and a lot of witnesses died, such as George de Mohrenschildt, who was Oswald's handler. And it sort of gives a little circumstantial credence to the idea that the TNT area is being used as a training ground for some of these teams who do these political assassinations. We've seen testimony on the Mothman list from people who have seen paramilitary troops training in the TNT area, as well as occult groups meeting. One lady saw an occult group in eastern Kentucky, sort of near Ashland. There's a lot of reports of occult activity there, as well as a Manson family group. It's probably the same, probably linked to the same group. Here we have, what's this? These are just some of the audio CDs that we came up with, just as sort of giveaways to go along with the DVDs. Here's another. John Keel. Oh, but the 2002 chakra event, or energy field event, where I experienced the opening of the chakras and saw a vision of the Elk River Bridge collapse, I think, which occurred 63 years before the Silver Bridge collapse on the same exact day, December 15th, which just passed here 3 days ago. And on that day, interestingly, we had a lady call into the new Mothman group, or write in, who, the moderator, in fact, who says that she had an MIB encounter buying was it an H.P. Lovecraft book? And the guy came in, he had on strange clothing that she couldn't tell from what era it was from. It looked medieval, it looked futuristic. He wanted her book, and then she jokingly said, well, pay me X certain amount, and he threw the money on the ground and then sort of threatened her, and then she got out. She was in a bookstore when this happened, so it was seen by other people. And at the same time, I got a call from a friend, Bonnie, who I'd met in 1980, but saw her a lot in 1981 at the same time that Harriet had come back into my life and told me about my dead father's message. And Bonnie has had a strange slew of occurrences in her life. She's also from a family with a mother who was a beauty pageant woman. She grew up in New Bedford, Massachusetts, which has a NASA satellite tracking facility. When she was, I remember when in 1981, she told me she had gone out on a date with a guy who was a diplomat from, I forget what country, but he had assaulted her and got away with it because of diplomatic immunity. She and I had a tight, close, just a real close friendship. And she writes 25 years later, after she found my DVD on the web, I sent it to her. She wrote back to say, well, all these different things that occurred to her, which were very strange, such as having missing fetuses. She married a guy who was a Navy commander, who had all these really strange things in his life, like an interest in the occult, the paranormal, pedophilia. He lied about some of the things he had done in the service, so he obviously was covering something up. He had missing time. She feels that he was mind-controlled. And all the time that she was married to this guy, a dark shadow followed her car, sort of flew above her car all the time, as if it were a Mothman shadow. And she said she had a patient. She's a psychologist now. She said she had a patient who told her that his father had been in a killer clown, on a killer clown team. This is a group of clowns, sort of like the John Wayne Gacy clown thing, who tortured and killed children. And she researched it and found out that there was really something to it. But the interesting thing was she said that she remembered me doing a drawing in 1981 of my father in a chair looking frightened. And I don't know, I believe I mentioned this earlier, that I had a dream, a nightmare in the late 1990s. Really, in a way, it started a lot of this off, because as soon as I had this nightmare, I was convinced that it had to do with cancer and my father being strapped in this chair, being interrogated. I thought, well, that's a message from my subconscious that I really need to take this turning 40, get your career together message seriously. So this nightmare that I had sort of kicked me into high gear as I was approaching 40. And I had actually talked to the shaman in Mexico about this dream, and he seemed to know what it was all about and helped me quite a bit with it. And as I thought more and more about it, I realized that it could have just been a scene from my dad's life that I've seen. He was being interrogated, and he was being told he had cancer. Sort of like, oh, we got you now, and baby, we're giving you cancer. Why would they do this? Probably because of my father's union activities at Union Carbide. He definitely told me that he knew who the men were who were going to blow up the chemical plant, or who claimed they were going to do it if they weren't given raises. I mean, we were living on shoestring then. We were drinking powdered milk. We were very poor. And this is a guy, my dad's risking his life every day working in dangerous chemicals, and I always assumed that he had been given cancer because every time there was a chemical spill, he was asked to go in and help clean it up. But this dream makes it seem as if maybe he was directly injected with something. And I thought that was a crazy idea at first, and the more I researched it, I found that, well, there are some indications that this was going on in the 60s with the David Ferry, the guy that I mentioned before, who may have been Frightwig, was involved in this very thing in Louisiana at the prison there in Baton Rouge, I believe. Some small, not in New Orleans, but a state facility. And he and Oswald were hired there and were experimenting on prisoners, shooting them with live cancer vaccines to see if they would take. And of course, Jack Ruby claims that this occurred to him in jail, that he was injected. And it appears that, it could have been these guys could have been trying to figure out ways to kill people creatively, and that by the time the Mothman situation came around, it was operational. My father didn't die for another 2 or 3 years after these events, maybe 4 years. So it's unlikely, and Ferry died in 1967 during the Mothman flap. So it's unlikely that he did it. And I don't believe I may have mentioned it before, but the timing of the start of the Mothman flap was it's coincided with a lot of other interesting things, such as Ferry's ammo secret hideout being raided by the garrison team, and then possibly moving those arms to West Virginia, to the TNT area, which had hundreds of these, storage tanks, mounds to store these things. So it's possible that they moved these things there. Also, this was a time period in which Peter D. Beater, we have his book here, Conspiracy Against the Dollar. Beater was saying that the Rockefellers were stealing the gold out of Fort Knox at this very time, so it's possible that the TNT area was used as a holding tank for some of this gold. It could have been floated upstream. Who knows? It could have hit the Silver Bridge and caused it to collapse. A barge full of heavy gold, or perhaps the bridge was taken down to try to stop the transfer, or there could be a lot of, possibilities there. I am rambling a bit, trying to get back on target here. What's our next thing? Oh, well, Bonnie had this. Bonnie said she saw this photo or drawing that I had done of my father in this chair. But I don't remember doing such a drawing. So, how do you explain that? Is she tapping into my subconscious? Is this a drawing that I did that I've forgotten about? Was I, 20 years before I had this nightmare, was I presaging it? Did I already know at some level that about my father's being possibly injected with cancer cells? Who knows? Interestingly, though, when my father first was operated on, he was taken to Cleveland, and Cleveland seems to be the locus of a lot of these conspiracy theories, which I'll go into in a minute. But after he recovered, strangely in the middle of the night, he felt like he'd been jabbed in the back, and woke up and had this intense pain in the spot. Well, he didn't have cancer then. The cancer was gone, but then suddenly, sometime later, it comes back again in that spot where he had been, quote, jabbed. And based on the fact that my sister and I both remember us being interrogated in a trance prior to this, it's possible that happened again. And these guys came in with it's well known that they were using, the CIA was using gases and LSD type hallucinogenics and things on people. Had been doing it since the 50s. So it's possible that he was injected again to make sure that he got it again. One thing I want to go back to just real quick. Here's that photo again that shows this thing looking in the window from 1973. I have my West Virginia Tech t-shirt on. Tech is where the NATO commander went to school. Commander of NATO in Europe. And here's a blow-up of that face. And to notice how similar it looks to this. Let me see if I can. Sort of to this face. This is from New Zealand, the Maori conception of the Garuda. Pretty striking. Also, I had a dream that I saw what looked like Ezekiel's wheel over Blaine Island, which is where we lived, there in what was once called Mound, West Virginia, now called North Charleston. There were hundreds of mounds there. And you see in this early depiction of Ezekiel's wheel, we have a winged humanoid with 4 faces, very similar to the idea that, and the faces are all different. They all look slightly different, like different animals, indicating that if this is the Mothman, that the Mothman can appear. Sometimes we see him with a dog face, sometimes with more of a bird face, sometimes with more of a serpent face, as in the case of this, more reptilian. I've got a little list of things to cover that some of which I may have covered. I apologize if I have. In the description for the DVD, I mentioned the missing bridge victims from the Silver Bridge, and I'm not really referring to I think her name was Byers. She disappeared. I think whenever you think about the Silver Bridge victims, and even these guys at Carbide who got cancer, you have to, in order to understand what really happened, we have to know more about these people. It's my suspicion that these guys that got cancer, and maybe even some of the bridge victims, were from families of guys who were union organizers and may have been targeted. The fact that the stoplight on the Silver Bridge wasn't working indicates that maybe someone was watching who was on the bridge that night. And we had reports of men on the bridge a week prior, dressed in typical covert op garb, the checkered jacket. But I was referring to the Maddox characters, who John Keel was told were on the bridge, but no one ever found them. And the name Maddox comes up several times in this. We sort of have this web of things that you have assassinations teams, you have guys doing medical research like MK Ultra, mind control, cancer, missing gold, drugs. Reports of some of these defense contractors in the Kanawha Valley making untraceable weapons being flown out to other parts of the world. The helicopter teams in Kentucky. The fact that all the guys going to Vietnam were trained in Lexington. And reports that Michael Aquino, the well-known occultist, Satanist from the Army, who has been implicated in child molestation things, and he's capturing kids and turning them into covert operators. He was actually in the area by 1970 that we know of. And so that's an indicator. He was in Kentucky, so that's an indicator that some of these MK Ultra guys were in Kentucky. And there was, I read somewhere that one of the bigger hospitals that they were experimenting on people was located in Lexington, near this huge army base. But Colonel Maddox, we have a Colonel Maddox who was supposedly on the bridge. His daughter, this was what Keel was told, and of course the first person I thought of was Kathleen Maddox, who was Charles Manson's mother. He was called No Name Maddox until she married a Colonel Scott. And, well, I don't know why he wasn't called Scott at that point. Anyway, eventually it was changed to Manson. But who was Kathleen Maddox's father? We don't know. Perhaps this is a reference to her and her father. We do know that she knew Larry Flint's mother. And so you have to wonder, how did these two high-profile guys who went out to the West Coast and made names for themselves, how did their mothers know each other? Well, they were both from northern Kentucky. This book here talks about Manson being from Sinister Forces by Peter Levenda, about Manson living in Ashland, Kentucky for a while. His uncle lived there, his uncle who was murdered in 1967, 68. Colonel Scott's brother. How did they know each other? Flint and Maddox. Well, they both worked for probably an overarching group of mobsters who ran northern Kentucky, who were run out in 1960, ended up in Vegas. All these people ended up in Vegas working in the casinos. One of the casinos, like which one was it? It was run by Mo Dalitz of Cleveland, a big mobster from Cleveland. I can't remember the name of the exact which casino it was. But there was kind of a power struggle in northern Kentucky between the Philadelphia mobsters who ran West Virginia and the Cleveland mobsters who ran Ohio. So we don't know for sure, but there is a connection with Philadelphia and, let's see, well, Angelo Bruno was the big mobster in Philadelphia at the time, and we had a Jack Bruno living next door to Harriet, who was a mobster who had heroin, and he may have been part of the Bruno family from Philadelphia. But also from Philadelphia, you had Andrea Puharich, who was one of the inventors of the black box mind control box, which he claimed they could put into a room and cause disorientation and certain effects back in the early 60s. And this is something that's been claimed about Point Pleasant, is that they were able to beam waves at the town and cause people to act funny. So Puharich is the first person you think of who would be able to do that. Puharich was from Philadelphia, or he had set up his office there with the help of Arthur Young, the founder of Bell Helicopter out of Dallas. Bell Helicopter comes back around, and in Young's family, I think it was his daughter, was married to Michael Payne, who was Oswald's a landlord and worked for Bell Helicopter. There was a Colonel Maddox who worked for Bell Helicopter. So there's all these circles and webs, and they're very it's very tempting to find something there. It's unclear what exactly it is, but there seems to be something there. There's a Holly Maddox. Puharich had a friend, Ira Einhorn, who's the famous unicorn killer. Is that unicorn killer? Who was out of the country for many years, and they finally brought him back recently and put him on trial. He supposedly killed Holly Maddox. Well, he's connected to Philadelphia. He's from Philadelphia as well. A radical leftist, but a scientist. Friends with Puharich, worked on projects with him. They had lots of chips. They had a deal with a defense contracting chip maker, so they could put these little computer chips in their devices. I think Puharich also invented the tooth implant, for the tooth implant where you can hear voices through the tooth implant. And Lucille Ball, in fact, I just saw a clip where she claimed that she had heard voices coming through her tooth and found that it was a Japanese listening station buried beneath LA, I think. So these are, very interesting connections. Then there's Alvis Maddox. Well, Alvis Maddox was the name given to Keel, and of course he was the Dallas sheriff who found the extra bullet that proved that JFK assassination was a conspiracy. He turned it in. He refused to change the story, and was killed on the job. I'm sorry. Maddox was with the officer who found the bullet. So Maddox could have been, who knows, possibly could have been involved somehow. People claim that maybe he was in on it and shot the officer who had found that bullet. But he was from Dallas. And another interesting thing I found out recently was that the guy who actually did the Manson killings was from Dallas, and he was from a big police family in Dallas, Charles Watson. And they were so powerful that they were able to keep him from being extradited to California for trial. And he seemed to be mind controlled. He'd obviously been taking LSD with Manson, was dealing drugs with the Labiancas, or shipping them, or he was their courier or something like that, via Mexico. And after his conversion in prison, well, before his conversion, he shriveled up and almost died, which is an indication of mind control, because sometimes people there's a fail-safe programming that they should kill themselves or die if they're caught. Well, somehow he managed to live and has undergone this conversion to Christianity. Another killer assassin is James Earl Ray. His book, Tennessee Waltz. Excellent book for those just looking to find out what goes on in the prison system. Interestingly, Ray claims that there was a Rockefeller syndicate controlling Tennessee at the time and kept him from getting a trial. They desperately wanted to keep the MLK assassination uninvestigated, and it was important to never have a trial, because then, of course, the secret files that the FBI had on King and Ray would have to come out. Interestingly, Ray had this connection to Montreal, where he got his alias from, the Union Carbide employee's name that Ray used. Montreal figures prominently here and there in this web. We have JFK conspirators, Clay Shaw, who was put on trial by Garrison, flying to Montreal with David Ferry, the Frightwig Man, we think, where they talked about, they were overheard talking about, what was that? Can't remember. And we have a Mothman. Soon after my video came out, a person cropped up out of nowhere from Montreal, saying that she had seen Mothman and was only going. She had seen Mothman in Ravenswood, but was now living in Montreal, and that she would only tell her story to Lauren Coleman. And then at some point, after I brought up this issue of whether or not Coleman had defrauded a researcher and used his photographs without permission, she claimed that I had tried to steal her story, which was a blatant lie. So you have to wonder if some of these people from these key cities who are cropping up now, what their relationship is to this whole thing. Because they don't seem to be, they don't give any real information out. She never gave any information out about her sighting. She just said she'd seen Mothman. Nothing about her past, really. But this agenda to sort of discredit truthful research. What else do we have? The Downing, Captain Downing, Colonel Downing, was it Major Downing? Major Downing was if you'll recall, the man who claimed he had been involved in this black box experiment in Point Pleasant, where they were beaming this beam out. Was this Puharich in disguise? Well, all we know is that the stories came out on a Sony website, Sony Pictures website, in the late 90s. And if you do a search on a Major Jack Downing, you find that he's an old guy from Maine, an old author from Maine from the 1800s, an adventuristic author. So you have Maine, you have Sony Pictures, and you have a time period which is prior to the Mothman movie coming out by a couple of years. John Frick believes that it's just a teenager faking it, but the first person I thought of when you think of Sony Pictures, which was the company that did the Mothman movie, and I'm sure it was probably in pre-production by then at some point. It would have had to have been an insider in that Sony Pictures process. It could have been an insider. And I mean, we know that Lauren Coleman had the first showing of the movie before anyone else saw it at his place in Maine. He's from Maine, from the same town, I believe, where the Captain or Major Downing stories were located. So it was someone who was trying to make it seem like there was a connection to Coleman. Coleman's the cryptozoologist who continues to try to say that there's a death curse on anyone who does Mothman research, who claims to have researched all of the Silverbridge victims' families exhaustively, but we never see any of the data. He's the person connected to this Montreal woman, and has the backing from the big New York publishers. And I may have mentioned this before, but we have the Greek mob infiltrating Point Pleasant prior to the Mothman ever showing up. That earlier in that '66, according to an informant, the Greek mob at that time was working with the CIA in Greece, doing something called Operation Chaos, which was a destabilization, a disruption program aimed at peace activists and labor activists. And this was, according to this book, according to Alex Constantine's The Covert War Against Rock, all these rock musicians were killed by Operation Chaos. And it's possible that Operation Chaos, there's evidence here that Point Pleasant was a place where these Chaos agents were hanging out prior to, in early '66. By '67, Chaos was operational in the U.S., so they were going after using LSD and things like that to go after activists and labor people. So perhaps they were training these guys in the TNT area. This book it's also, and there's possibly a connection to Columbus, Central Ohio, Cleveland. This book, NASA, Nazis, and JFK, Torbett document, states that the assassination of JFK was run by a joint FBI, sort of a small team in the FBI, a small team within the military police sector based in Columbus, Defense Industrial Security Command, and NASA, and the security wing of NASA, which sort of ties in a lot of loose ends that occur here in the Mothman story. The interest of NASA, seeing NASA people coming around, NASA people in our neighborhood, two different families with my next door neighbors and Tommy's family. But interestingly, Werner von Braun was the head of this NASA security operation, and that links in with the whole Nazi paperclip scientists who were brought over from Germany, who had this mind control knowledge from all the stuff they'd done to the Holocaust victims. So it all starts to make sense that these operators brought into NASA from Germany had experience with all these techniques of mind control and experience with assassinations. Hitler had assassinated, I think, 400 people prior to rising to power, We had Richard Nixon, who's well known for killing lots of people. It's sort of the untold story of Watergate, that Nixon had a few people offed. And how does this connect to another key another operator in the JFK assassination was this guy, Fred Krisman, a Syrian man. We had a Syrian family living in my neighborhood who ended up becoming involved in, one of their kids was involved in drugs, high level Republicans in the state of West Virginia. This guy was involved in all kinds of shady operations, including the Maury Island, the first modern UFO sighting in 1947. Krisman was there on the scene, sort of spreading disinformation. We had 2 officers from the Army Intelligence, Air Force Intelligence die investigating this. They were based out of Hamilton Field, which is where Harriet's dad was serving a couple of years after that. I don't think he was there in 47, but a couple of years after that he was there. Krisman, well, supposedly was one of the 3 tramps caught in Dealey Plaza after the assassination. Anyway, interesting story. He was, Krisman did a lot of infiltrating of leftist, progressive groups, so even they went after small guys. He would infiltrate the school district here in Seattle and then just ruin the career of some progressive. He would, start people fighting against each other, spread lies and things, and basically just was called a disruption agent and working for the government to ruin people's careers. And interestingly, there's a gold connection to Krisman. He was a pilot and was flying for Swiss Air and was caught stealing gold that was on the plane. And just a little possible tie-in there with Fort Knox, the interesting gold. The David Ferry Frightwig guy, he had a connection to Cleveland. Getting back to Cleveland, he worked for an oil company. The oil industry started in Cleveland in I forget the date, but in the 1800s, 1860s, the Rockefellers set up their first corporation there, Standard Oil, which later had these connections with the Nazis during the war. They had a big sharing of synthetic oil patents. And this synthetic oil was made in my town. Actually, it was made right where the Tad Jones sighting occurred. As I said, Ferry was doing the cancer shots with Oswald. He worked at the Ochsner Clinic in New Orleans. Ochsner was the polio guy, the guy that popularized the polio vaccine, which apparently millions of doses of this vaccine were contaminated with cancer viruses, live cancer virus that may be the reason everyone's got cancer now. Ochsner was a big Nazi supporter. Indrid Cold was seen in Cleveland. I believe I may have mentioned that earlier. Was he an operative from Cleveland? Here's a new thing. It turns out that Indrid, that Woody Derenberger's, the man who had the relationship with Indrid, Woody's psychiatrist was Alan Roberts, Dr. Alan Roberts. Dr. Alan Roberts was the same psychiatrist who was treating my friend Tommy. And according to one of the mothers in the area, Roberts was traveling between Parkersburg, Charleston, and Huntington, specializing in the treating of abductees. It raises a lot of questions about Roberts. Raises questions about, Roberts believed he had been taken to Venus by Indrid Cold. So here we have a psychiatrist who may have been mind-controlled, treating other other kids and probably convincing them that they are being really visited by aliens. And UFO believers out there may ask, well, Andy, why are you questioning, the validity of these people's experiences? Maybe aliens are real. And I'm open to the idea that aliens are real. I'm very open to the idea that the phenomenon is a real phenomenon, that there really is a Mothman creature. However, I think there's a parallel synthetic thing going on, created by these shady operators, designed to exploit the situation. And with regard to Indrid, we let me see here. With regard to Indrid, we find that if you look at some of these contactees, they have all been shown a similar range of things involving ecology, and the Earth is being destroyed, the key though is that they often use the language of Blavatsky, Madame Blavatsky from the turn of the century, of the Space Brothers, the White Brotherhood from Tibet. This comes up a lot in the contactee lore, and once you realize that and you start looking at Levenda talks about the connection between Nazis. The Nazis believed, all of the big Nazis believed in this Blavatsky ideology. They believed in the Tibet, the Tibet White Brotherhood, and that's why we have these Nazis doing these trips to Tibet. And Nazis were also looking for gold, trying to get their hands on gold. But their ultimate was the Thule Ultima. Thule was their legendary land up near Iceland somewhere, from whence all of their was their godhead. It was where all of their beliefs came. And they had ecological beliefs, the Nazis did. They were, organic, vegan, whatever. Not unlike some of these contactees. But I believe it was in the Derenberger book that the Thule Ultima came up, and this is a direct linkage to the Nazi belief system. So it could be that these Nazis were, if they had the UFOs, which they supposedly did, and they brought that technology to America, and some of these UFOs were Air Force operated, and they were mind controlling people. Well, they were using the standard, what they'd been using for decades already. They used the same old Space Brothers, White Brotherhood of Tibet, Thule language. And you look, the more you look at the contactees' experience, the more you see other parallels with the Nazi situation, such as Derenberger being shown being taken to a jungle, which was Lanulos. But it was a jungle like you might find in South America, which is where the Nazis had their big enclave. So it's possible he was taken there, drugged and taken there, and just shown a jungle situation that they had sort of set up. There's a big compound there in South America called Colonia Dignidad, which Levenda, not in this book, but in his other book, here it is, in his other book, Unholy Alliance. In Unholy Alliance, we find the story of Colonia Dignidad, a big compound where they mind control people and torture them and so forth. So it's possible that Woody was taken to Colonia Dignidad. And the other amazing thing is he was made to believe he was flying over Iraq and shown all the different cities of Iraq. So it's possible that these UFOs were reconnaissance aircraft taking films of these sensitive spots, and even in that time, way back then, Iraq was very important. It was very important as far back as 1925 when they first signed the agreement to get the oil out of Iraq, Exxon and Mobil. American companies. They signed a deal that ran out in 2000. So, suddenly, around the time that the Bush administration starts talking about invading Iraq is just when this contract runs out, the 75-year contract runs out, has to be renegotiated. A very critical time for America to make sure that they keep getting the oil. And makes 911 all the more suspicious in terms of timing, because it gives the perfect rationale for coming down hard on the oil countries to keep that agreement in place. And you can find out more information about that agreement in this book, The Seven Sisters. And also goes into the early Cleveland connections to the oil companies. Another Cleveland thing, Patty Hearst. There were doubles of Patty Hearst seen in Cleveland. Well, no one knows if there were doubles or not, but there were reports of Patty Hearst being seen in Cleveland. Author John Judge, in this book, Judge for Yourself, believes that they were doubles. And but the interesting thing is that he points out that Bill Walton, the basketball player, and the coach at the University of Cincinnati, Gail Catlett, had something to do with putting Patty Hearst up for a couple of nights or something like that. And Walton went on the record on TV saying this once. And he's kind of a right winger who started off as a left winger, now as a right winger. And Judge thinks that that's kind of suspicious, and that maybe the University of Cincinnati, which had a mind control. When I was a student there, they made you had to go through an experiment. You had to do a psychological experiment for lab work. You had to be involved in a psychological experiment. And mine involved a two-way mirror, and they were asking me strange questions, and I sort of got frustrated with the whole thing and said, I don't, it's obvious what you're doing here with this two-way mirror, and it's not working, and they're like, get out of here. But, reports of Cincinnati having one of these mind control hospitals. But this coach at Cincinnati was the coach that I tried to approach my freshman year in college for basketball. I had a basketball coach in high school who did not help me at all to get a scholarship, except he wanted me to go to this one particular college, Salem, which is sort of up in northern West Virginia, where all the intelligence colleges are, where a lot of the spies go to school. I never could understand why it wanted me to go to Salem only. But this coach had been accused of trying to have dalliances with high school girls, and my sister had come forward to accuse him. Well, and she was older than I was, so by the time I was playing basketball, it appears that he was sort of taking this out on me by not helping me. And he was good friends he had been college roommates with Gail Catlett, this coach at Cincinnati. So it's possible that these guys were sort of linked into a network of kind of criminal activity or whatever, and that this came to affect me personally when I went to play basketball there. I eventually transferred the next year to Marshall and got on the team, but I got injured, and that was my career. Another Cleveland thing was, I just saw a documentary on 911 and found that Cleveland was the town that had they had a couple of flights. I didn't catch all of it, but I know they had at least one emergency flight involving a hijacked plane landed in Cleveland, and I think they alluded to a couple of others, but they tried to just focus on one to make you just think there was one, but it's obvious that there were more. It seems as if hijacked planes, and that was a day when they had several exercises going on, live exercises involving having fake planes flying around on the screens, but also real planes that were decoys flying, and And it appears that Cleveland was the center for all this stuff. Very suspicious. And those who wonder what happened to the people on some of these flights, because one lady claims that she's gone to the reunion for her flight that crashed, or her husband died on, and that no one ever comes to the reunion. Where are the people? So maybe some of the manifests were faked on some of these flights. Maybe some of the people were transferred to other planes, or the Shanksville plane. Maybe they're all maybe people from other flights. Like there's some people claim that the planes that hit the towers did not have windows, that they were kind of painted to look like United Airlines, but they really weren't. Or maybe they transferred these people to other planes and then crashed those planes to get rid of the witnesses. Or maybe they didn't do that, they just told them to shut up or whatever. But there was a crash in Colorado that was never investigated. It was reported and then suddenly disappeared from the screen, from the news. We had the Shanksville crash, and the Pentagon plane doesn't appear to have been a big plane at all. But it's interesting that the flight path went over Point Pleasant for the Pentagon plane, and it's the same flight path, mind you, that the Braxton County Monster, the night of the Braxton County Monster sightings. Do they have it in here? The flight path was very similar to the 911 Pentagon plane, which, if these were faked operations or manufactured operations, and you were dealing with people that didn't have much creativity, they might fall back on an old flight plan, or use a flight plan that conveniently went over certain bases where they could track them better, such as the fact that it did fly over the Sugar Grove Navy facility. Both of those did, the Pentagon and the Flatwoods. Here's the I just saw it here. That's kind of the yeah, anyway. Going back to the Visitors from Lanulos book for a sec, right after they talk about Indrid Cold, he had a team of guys helping him, buddies. One was called Demo Hassan, which is kind of a Middle Eastern name. They drove a Volkswagen. When Dr. Alan Roberts was meeting with Indrid and Woody one night, Demo and another guy went to the Roberts home and kind of were stalking it while the kids were there, writing messages on the frosty windows and things, which is kind of strange. It's possible that Roberts was a victim himself. He was being watched. He could have been mind-controlled into believing he was taken to Venus. He had 3 kids, so he's not, your standard kind of covert operator. But right after they talk about this part of the story, they talk about a woman who was apparently drugged, at a soda fountain in Marietta, Parkersburg, can't remember, in that area, Mineral Wells maybe. And she was taken to Venus. But she didn't remember anything that happened for hours after she sat down at the soda fountain. Well, what happened? Somebody put a drug in her drink, and it's in one of these books that they talk about that the CIA had an MK Ultras doctor who was a magician who specialized in being able to put LSD or other drugs in people's drinks, and he was described in both books. And it sounds like it could be the same person, a large, sort of a tall guy. And the Volkswagen thing. Roberts is being tracked by a guy who drives a Volkswagen, who claims he's from Venus, or Lanulos. And a Volkswagen shows up in our neighborhood to investigate Harriet's dad's car bombing. Could it have been Demo Hassan and Indrid Cold who came to Harriet's home, posing as FBI investigators? Well, that's it for my notes. I've got other books here that are interesting. I may have mentioned this. Men in Black, The Secret Terror Among Us by Gray Barker. Excellent book by Gray Barker. Talks a little bit more about the Tad Jones sighting. Another thing about the Tad Jones sighting. Tad Jones had been an engineer at Carbide prior to his becoming an appliance salesman. Woody Derenberger was an appliance salesman as well. It's possible that Tad Jones and Woody Derenberger knew each other. And I remember reading somewhere, I believe it's in this book, Mass Control, Engineering Human Consciousness by Jim Keith, where they talk about Maytag appliance salesman being, the CIA was using Maytag as a, because these appliance salesmen go everywhere. They have an excuse to be all over the place. So, and another cover that they use is the Bishop, the Wandering Bishop. David Ferry, Frightwig Man, was a wandering bishop. Fred Krisman was a wandering bishop. These guys would consecrate each other, and that gave them the excuse to be everywhere, any time of the day, doing good work for the Lord. Ferry was consecrated in Kentucky by a big. There were three major consecrators in the country, and one of them was in Kentucky. I can't recall his name offhand, but Ferry was consecrated by him. So it shows that Ferry probably was in Kentucky. This same guy flew to New York to meet with. New York was sort of the central, where they had a real Catholic church there that was run by these wandering bishops. Didn't have any clientele. No one ever came. They did hold mass, and they collected lots of money from the neighborhoods. It was a place where FBI men, CIA men would meet with the bishops and plan things. But this consecrator of Ferry died the same month as Ferry did, in February '67, after he had gone to New York to meet, because they were having some issues. There were lots of things going on, lots of covert ops. Another point in this book that he makes is that there was a Colonel Downing, or a General Downing, who was on the board of Network Solutions, which runs the internet, or runs the names for the internet, the domain names, basically started the internet. So they had a general on the staff named Downing, who well, Network Solutions was owned by SAIC, which is Scientific Applications International Corporation. CIAS spelled backwards. So it's based in La Jolla, California, which is, and they had a their server, the server for SAIC was called a company called Space Star, based in Eden Prairie, Minnesota, which is the same web server as Heaven's Gate, the Heaven's Gate cult had. Heaven's Gate was also based in La Jolla, California, where SAIC had its corporate headquarters. And the Heaven's Gate cult was used to cover up the James Earl Ray, Martin Luther King family summit, where they came out to say that James Earl Ray was innocent. So they held off on they definitely held off on the announcement of the Heaven's Gate cult for a couple of days, and they broke all previous rules regarding showing the deaths. Comments have been made that they'd never shown dead bodies like that on TV. They did everything they could to make it as gory and incredible as they could, and strange as they could, to drown out the fact that the King family was saying that James Earl Ray was innocent and that they wanted a new trial. So, another link back to assassinations there, a sort of a cult, using cults, using mind control. Obviously, these guys were mind controlled. The Applewhite, the guy that headed the Heaven's Gate cult, I saw that name on one of the manifests for the World Trade Center flights that had crashed into the towers. I think there were like 3 or 4 Applewhites on there. Maybe they killed the remaining family members of the Applewhite family because they knew too much. Who knows? San Diego is a hotbed of strange research. It is also the location for Naval Electronic Systems Command, which have been reported to have been another one of the funding sources for Hal Puthoff's early remote viewing experiments at Stanford Research Institute. Puthoff and Puharich, who I mentioned earlier, were comrades. Another tie-in to the Philadelphia mind control, Ira Einhorn, Maddox circle. The owner of the house that the Heaven's Gate people lived in was Ian Spiro, who was murdered. CIA. He was a CIA and British intelligence operative who was murdered. Well, it says here he was a member of Heaven's Gate. So, interesting book. Jim Keith probably murdered as well. Other books: Conspiracy Reader, Paranoia Magazine. Article in here about Nixon and how all the different well, they sort of talk about how Nixon came to power. Had Nazi help. They talked about the Rockefeller signature, which they were looking at the miners that were killed in Colorado by the Rockefellers back in 1915 or whatever it was, and how sort of the style in which the things had occurred, they allow the protesters or whatever to protest and protest and protest, and to wait for it to sort of reach a certain point, and then they just go in and just, without warning, kill a few people in cold blood, and in other words, they want there to be enough. They let them get riled up, and maybe even cause them to be more riled up to have a justification. And I guess the same thing happened at the Attica prison riots, where Nelson Rockefeller sort of let it go to a real extreme and didn't do things early on that he should have to keep it under control, and then just went in and just murdered all the prisoners. Here's a shot from Wheeling, West Virginia, where the Sterling Corporation used to have its offices. Sterling, let's see here. Let's get our book out. Here's a book that details it all. I'll try to get it in there. Aspirin Wars. The Aspirin Wars were where you find a small obscure West Virginia company controlling Bayer in America. The founder of Bayer, or the CEO of Bayer, or IG Farben in Germany, was the biggest shareholder of Standard Oil during the war. There was this linkage between Standard Oil and IG Farben and the Nazis. There's not a whole lot that we know because it's also secretive. Standard Oil has been called more secretive than the CIA. But we do have a few books out like this, and we have the, what's the other one called? The Rise and Fall of IG Farben. Another book, I've probably shown this one, but The Shadow of Santa Susana has a page in there, paragraph about Manson and Moore knowing each other. How Manson was watched, controlled, and then Watson was sent in to infiltrate and actually do the killings by probably the same folks in Dallas that did the JFK hit to kill the peace movement, basically. Have Manson have all these crazy killings, kill the peace movement, and keep this going. The war in Vietnam is outlined in the Phoenix Program book. All you need to know about the assassination teams that were set up in Vietnam. Using, by the way, a Mothman-like emblem as their mascot, the Phoenix. Has all the symbolisms that you find in the Garuda. You have the serpent that has become being transformed into a ribbon and is carrying a couple of bombs. There's a mention of a downing in here. There was another operator in, I don't think it was the same Downing that worked for Bell. But that Downing from Bell probably, based on his history, I think he was in Laos. That means he was part of the secret. A lot of these secret guys were in Laos. Program to Kill. For those who want to find out what the linkage is between the serial killers and mind control, in order to effectively carry out the Phoenix program of assassinating, terrorizing the North Koreans or North Vietnamese, they needed guys who could separate their subconscious, separate themselves enough to be able to do the atrocities and still function over here and follow commands and things. So they would, first they desensitized them to violence. The Navy was big on this, did a lot of this, Army as well, and they had techniques showing films like the contactees saw, films of violence, and then having them do small tasks while they watched these films, becoming more and more used to functioning while seeing horrible scenes. And then, of course, it became more elaborate as the years went on to where they could program them, and then they couldn't even remember doing the atrocities. And we actually had someone in my family who got caught up in this and spent a couple of years in prison, came back, his personality had been wiped. I mean, he was no longer the same person at all. I mean, he had whatever personality, the bubbly, nice guy was gone, and we had like I don't know, but he worked for one of the Coca-Cola companies and got his job back after all of that. And I believe the author of this book had his child murdered after writing it. Expanding Case for the UFO. This is Morris K. Jessup's third book. He died not long after this, probably because he spends a lot of time in here debunking the media and how the media was treating the UFO cases and how they were. He was heavily into satellites. He's an astronomer, but he started getting involved in studying satellites and how they were operating. And I think he firmly believed that there was a supernatural, invisible UFO fleet out there that was people were crashing into and that were sucking water out of lakes and dumping all of these fish and everything. Indications that there have been secret craft around for decades. And again, there could be a natural UFO phenomenon, but there's definitely a synthetic one as well. And I think the more he probed into the synthetic part of it, the NASA satellites and the eavesdropping satellites, what later became the eavesdropping satellites, the more he got into trouble. Probably showed this before, but I'll show it again. Strength of the Wolf, story of the Federal Bureau of Narcotics. The Bruno name came up in here. Montreal. The Vegas connections, the Cleveland connections, the interfacing of the FBI, the Mafia, CIA, military, church, using these wandering bishops in a lot of cases. So I'm going to stop here now, and it's been quite a long introduction. I don't know if I'm going to come back at the end of this, but we're going to move on here to 2004, late 2004, as the vote was occurring. One of the strange things I noticed here in Seattle was during that whole week of the presidential vote, we had a weird low hum that was penetrating the house, and my wife noticed it, and anyway, it makes you wonder what was going on, if there was some electromagnetic beam sent out to sort of influence people's thoughts on how they might vote, or reduce friction, so to speak. But it was a definite thing. It definitely was happening. But I followed one of my paranormal witnesses who has had some strange psychic things happening with her kids. Was also an election worker, and I followed her around Levecke and Levecke Mas, and called some people. Called Jim Woodring, one of our previous witnesses who had a precognition of 911, and drew it. Who else is on there? We go back with Craig Knebel. Craig from our Bigfoot expedition. We go with him to a Nader rally at Seattle Center, which is a sort of where's that photo? Sort of I think it's a power center, as I mentioned. Here's a shot of it. There's a Thunderbird totem there. And so we have an adventure there with the Nader rally. We also interview his wife's family, his wife and her family, who have had a range of different experiences. The White family, originally hailed from the Appalachians, southern edge of West Virginia, down there where it meets Kentucky, Virginia, Tennessee, and also where we have a little bit of Kuoni lapsaritis in there, and this is we get into the bonus part at this point, because Lapsaritis and I had a falling out over some things. Originally, he was very open to talking about his Bigfoot experiences in relation to Mothman. He didn't know much about Mothman, but he was, interested in in what I had to say about the idea that maybe Bigfoot and Mothman are cousins, or maybe they're the same creature. Maybe Bigfoot can sprout wings when he needs to, because there is one film that kind of shows that that's happening in the film. It's called the July 4th footage, I think it's called, where you see something sprouting from the back of this Bigfoot. And at some point, well, we were very friendly, and I agreed not only after, once he interviewed with me for the Mothman thing, then I was going to help him do some video for his own use for his for table conference, at a conference table, when he would go give talks, he could sell this for himself. And at some point, he wanted that to take precedence over my Mothman project, and we got into a squabble about priorities and had a falling out. So he didn't want to be involved after that, and so we're giving this part of the footage away for free. It's not a for sale thing, because I don't want to. We did have a couple of legal squabbles that didn't go anywhere. but one of his lawyers was from a firm in Tacoma called Luce something, and it appears to be the Luce of the Henry Luce family, known to be CIA family that bought the Zapruder film and kept it under wraps for all those years. So I don't know if that's true or not, but from what I could tell, it might be. Did some research, so that's kind of an interesting angle, a coincidence. But we wish Corny the best. He's got some great ideas on herbs and what's happening with the Bigfoot psychically, and wish him the best. And again, we're just giving that away as bonus for purchasing the DVD series, and we thank everyone who has done so, and perhaps we'll talk more in the future. Thanks. (10:11:04). Going to the Nader rally today, meeting Craig Knebel. Craig recently had an argument with his parents about their support of Bush. He's very upset about the way things are going. Lies perpetrated by the Bush administration. He's feeling very raw. He didn't want to do this today. He's agreed to run the camera. So I'm going to talk to him here in a second and see how he's feeling. One of the things about people caught up in the Mothman phenomena, like Craig, who've had the experiences, seen the red eyes, so forth, is that they are very emotional, and yeah, it's part of being creative. I guess if you had to classify political events, a Ralph Nader rally in Seattle would be a pretty liberal event, quote, liberal. So it'll be interesting to see the variety of answers we get today, as we try to probe and find out why people support Ralph Nader and why some people are really down on him. It seems as if the rally has been very poorly advertised, and because there are foes of Nader who don't want his message to get out. Here we are at the center house for Seattle Center. We're at the information booth, and here's what it says: sorry, closed. And none of the employees around here seem to know where the talk is, or the rally. Interesting. You'd think in Seattle you'd get a little more advertising. Croatia Fest.
That's very exciting. Or the Buddy Walk. WNBA Finals. The Northwest Bead Society is having a meeting here. There you go.
So Craig, you're going to do the camera work today, but I was wondering if you could give an opening statement, just sort of what's happened to you lately in regards to this sort of political stuff. Is that where are you at? It sounds like you're a little raw right now, you said.
Yeah. I'm very saddened by the state of the world and the political discourse that exists at this point in time.
And it was even so bad that you got into it with your parents? That must have been hard.
Well,
maybe you don't want to talk about that, but...
No, not really. Not really. I wouldn't go so far as to say that no, I don't want to go into that.
Okay. Any...
But I find it to be a very sad time in the world that we live in. And, what can I say? We're here today to attempt to find some sort of Nader rally. And, on that, I can't imagine what he's actually rallying for. And on an ideological level, I'm totally behind what he's saying and what he's doing. But I think it's the wrong time for that sort of thing, based on the the situation the world is in right now, our country is in right now.
One of the questions I'd like to ask people today is, if they do support Nader, would they still support him if they knew about all this recent evidence that the Bush administration knew about 9/11? Would they still stay with their position, which apparently undermines Kerry, the opponent to Bush? You know, Nader is widely seen as taking votes away from the liberal candidate.
That's
So
the
if their
common
supporters knew,
consensus, yeah.
but let's assume that some of these books that are coming out about 9/11 and the Bush administration are true, then that's a very dangerous, situation. We've got people.
It's a dangerous person to leave in power.
Exactly. So would they still feel that way if they knew how important it was to?
Oh, I bet so. Yeah. I would think that the logic is that, as far as I know, the logic is that there is we should have more than a two-party system. Absolutely, I totally agree with that. So here's a man who's come up and is representing himself and his ideology, and saying that he is expanding the two-party system, that the two-party system exists today. There's essentially no difference between the two. So I'm sure that he and his supporters would say that, well, of course Bush is evil, but that doesn't matter because Kerry's evil as well. So you throw out one, you get another, you just get a different chapter of the same thing. That's what I would imagine that they would say.
Do you feel that way? Do you feel that since those two were in the same fraternity, that maybe it wouldn't make a whole lot of difference, or do you think it would make a difference?
I think it would make a difference.
No.
I would certainly say that probably if you looked at large-scale issues of corporate influence and abuse in the political system that exists today, yes, that is not going to change. That is just, that is endemic in the system, and there's nothing that Kerry or Bush or, even if Nader got in, I don't think he's going to be able to do anything about it, except, kill the government and start again, which is not I don't think that's a recognizable goal. But at any rate, with
he would probably expand government. He would probably.
Nader would, you think?
Yeah, he'd come up with programs for the poor. I mean, I'm sure there'd be a lot more spending that way.
Yeah, one would think he would cut. He would be cutting while he was expanding.
Well, he might be cutting the military.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah, and of course, they don't want that in the military. So. It's a pretty tough situation there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So he'd probably end up being assassinated if he were actually elected. But at any rate, I just think that at this point in time, that many have called me an idealist as well, and in another place of time, I would probably be a Nader vote. But right now, I don't see anything positive that's happened in the last 4 years, and I cannot imagine anything positive that's going to happen in the next 4, and that is not I think the stakes are too high.
The psychic Harriet Plumbrook says that a lot of the Reiki masters and the people that do energy work around the country have banded together, and they're literally trying to change the thought patterns of Bush and Cheney.
Oh, really?
Through psychic means.
Yeah.
You think that there's any chance that sort of thing? I mean, the basic question is, what do you do in this situation? I mean, it seems like there's nothing you can do. Yet some people are going to the extent of using psychic, almost witchcraft, you could say, white witchcraft or something. I mean,
the only thing that I found that I could do is just remind myself that everything is temporal. Someday we'll all be dead. That's about the only way I can. That's about the only way I can move on from here. At the end of the day, at some point in time in the future, we will all be for naught, and this too shall pass. Yada yada. I went and meditated this morning. That's what I did.
Here we are at Croatia Fest. Would you say that your meditation is a way of wouldn't you say that that's similar to the psychics, what the psychics are doing? I mean, some similarity?
No, mine is purely for selfish reasons, at least at this point in time. Just, it's a...
But I imagine that you're sending out, there's a meditation where you sort of send out you make union with the positive forces in life, love for others.
Well, how the
Maybe that makes a difference.
Yeah, one could certainly do that. Right now, I'm just concentrating on, or I'm just, I am practicing letting go. That's my personal meditation right now, is just letting go. Trying to develop the ability to shut down. Yeah, or not shut down. I mean, it's that whole yin-yang thing. Shut down, open up. I mean, it's the same thing, but it's about nothing. To embrace nothing.
What does Croatia mean to you?
Croatia? Croatia there should be like a Croatian waffle, I think. It reminds me of a sweet, sticky pastry.
Look at this. We have the Croatia has a gym team, a really good gymnastics team, I would imagine.
Really?
I mean, look, judging from the photos.
Well, who is that? Is that Croatia or is that U.S.? It's got the red, white, and blue.
Well,
Maybe she's
Croatia
from
is now
Croatia.
part of the United States.
Oh, really? Isn't Croatia like next to San Juan or Puerto Rico, something like that? Don't they share a border?
Yeah, she's a U.S.
Yeah. So that's the golden no.
So you were saying that you saw Fahrenheit 9/11
Yeah.
last night?
No,
The night before?
last.
What were your feelings about it?
Oh, it was just all very sad. It was just absolutely very sad. It was really kind of as far as what it was kind of a mishmash of stuff. Yeah, it's kind of like what Michael Moore does a lot. He throws stuff out there and it's evocative on an emotional level, but they're not real clear treaties. There's not a real clear dialogue he's setting up there, or a clear statement he's setting up. It's really just images of Bush and people dying and Cheney being an asshole and things going wrong and stuff. And he's not, so the implication is certainly there, but he never comes out and says it. At any rate, it was just very sad. It was very sad for me.
A conspiracy writer recently said that he thought that it was more important to simply drive a wedge, if you will, or point out to take the official story and to point out how it's changed, instead of trying to present any evidence like Moore does. This guy's saying, well, actually, I would say the Moore did some of this. I think he did just simply I think one of his goals was probably to just discredit the official story.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that has and I've heard others, I guess what I'm saying is I've heard others say that is the most effective way to get people to even start to think about it.
Yeah.
Because if you present them with the hard evidence right off, they typically reject it because they don't yet disbelieve the official story.
Yeah. I just wonder who in this country actually does not have their minds made up. I mean, I could say liar, liar, liar all day long and have just, all sorts of documentation, pictures, showing things that they're saying didn't happen, showing that they did happen. And I can guarantee you there's, all those Republicans in Iowa would not be fazed. They are just the things that I hear today coming into my sphere from people who say they are in favor of Bush's policies and love him as a person and as a leader. It's beyond me. And when I hear those things being said, I can't imagine how you can even touch those people. Especially I heard a report the other day, on they were interviewing supposed people of faith, and getting their feelings of these people of faith on Bush. And this one woman comes on and she's talking about, oh, absolutely, I'm voting for Bush. He shares my moral my moral code and my good Christian ethics and stuff like that. And I just got to say, what planet is she from? I've got a little poster on my refrigerator that has a picture of Jesus with a bomb in his hand, and it says, "Who would Jesus bomb?" I mean, what kind of moral is it that says that that this guy is a good, God-fearing Christian, turning the other cheek, forgiving everybody, giving hand, putting everyone else in front and above himself. And
They believe that?
And yes, well, it's in the Bible. No, that's what I would say. It's hypocritical.
They say he's espousing those ideals.
Right, exactly. They say that he is a good Christian man. He shares our beliefs and our good Christian beliefs and values. So therefore he's a good man. Some Christians that you talk to, the more fundamental they become, the more you hear this, that Bush is the right man for the job because of his Christian values. They were saying in the report that the minister was, they were essentially showed two religious communities, and one of which the preacher was saying, public, it's your own personal decision, it's your own personal choice, your own personal Jesus, that sort of thing. And then the other group was saying that the pastor actually endorsed candidates from the pulpit and told them how to, told the people how to vote, because he said that was his God-given. It's not a right prerogative. He was commanded to do that for the betterment of the world.
Right.
He was commanded to lead his flock, and then they were talking to people who were in this particular church, and that was the one that had this one woman who was going on and on about how Bush was such a moral man, and she was going to vote for him because she believed there should be our country should be ruled by someone with good Christian values. And that's when I just when you hear those statements, I'm at a loss for what to do when you hear that, because you're not, those people are in their own world, and there's no way you're going into that world to pull them out. The only thing that's going to get get them,
cult deprogramming.
Yeah, I mean, it's a cult. It's some sort of in some ways it's a cult. They're gone. I mean, there's nothing that's going to change. And you could put a picture of Bush, having cocktails with Osama in front of him, and they would just say, it's photoshopped. Well, they probably wouldn't even know what Photoshop was, but they would say it's all a lie. It's fabrication. It's that liberal media. Oh, it's that old evil liberal media is getting you. Just get him away from here. Get him away from me. Ooh, that liberal media. They're everywhere, aren't they? So, I don't know. I'm totally at a loss. And so I try to I'm attempting to laugh about it, because if I try to take it too seriously, it's just becomes too painful.
We're thinking it might be a key arena here, and we're, the rally. And one of the things we noticed that this might hold us up, is that you can't bring dangerous missiles. No dangerous missiles, Craig.
Potentially dangerous.
Did you have any that were potentially dangerous with you? So here we've come upon an exhibit called Nightmare at the Center. So you think this is where the Nader rally is going to be?
This is it. He's going to come popping out from behind the curtain.
So now we're talking about Dick Cheney, because I was recently reading a review on a book. I haven't read the book yet, but it's called Crossing the Rubicon by Michael Ruppert. And Ruppert in there believes that, and has quite a bit of evidence for the idea that Cheney was the mastermind behind 9/11. And so that's what we're discussing here, is the old Dick Cheney angle. How does
just this? Very nice.
It kind of harkens back to what I was saying earlier, or the question that I had for people, which would be, if they knew that Cheney was behind 9/11 or the Bush administration, or that they knew and they let it happen, would that change their minds? That's what Cheney, how I think Cheney matters here today to talk about him.
If people knew that Cheney was behind 9/11, behind the attack on the World Trade Center,
that he made a lot of decisions that day to have the fighters not chase down the planes, and
that'll never come. I don't think that that'll ever come to light. There'll be so much obfuscation around it, and I think that it's people inherently don't want to believe that.
The fact that
So
there's also the fact that Porter Goss, the new CIA director, who Cheney was really, supporting, Goss met the day of the disaster, or it may have been the day before. He was meeting with the Pakistani general who was implicated as having wired Muhammad Atta $100,000. So Porter Goss is meeting with the guy that paid the hijacker, the leading hijacker. Was paid by a guy who was buddies and meeting with
why was
Porter
the lead
Goss.
hijacker paid if he was going to die?
That's what we're wondering, because there's more than one Muhammad Atta. That's one thing that's been covered up. There's apparently 2 or 3 guys calling themselves Muhammad Atta, and so the implication is that Atta got away, that it wasn't even on the plane.
Oh,
That's what it sort of hints at, and why the official story has changed so many times. Because they keep pulling out a certain guy at a certain moment. They'll pull one of these hijackers out, or one of these Al Qaeda guys. He'll be in the news. He'll play a role, and then they'll have to decide whether or not to keep going with his story, because obviously people ask questions, and they were asking questions about this general from Pakistan. He was a very hot item. Well, then they realized that we better get him out of the picture. So the government actually got him out of his position. He's no longer the general of the army.
he's not a general in Pakistan
Right.
anymore.
He was busted down and taken out of the media. His story. So the fact that he gave Muhammad Atta the 100,000 is now, it hasn't been proven untrue. It's just no longer part of the discussion. So that's sort of how they've done it. They've just taken chunks out that are hampering their cause and just throwing them, sort of tossing them away, and the media goes along, and no one.
Yeah, there is no truth. There just is no truth. There's whatever you happen to believe, but there is no truth. So, and it happens from all sides. The nature of the debate these days is just to say, I have red hair. But sir, I can clearly see on top of your head, blah, blah, I have red hair. But I read in all the reports that, that you actually have blonde hair. I have red hair. Well, thank you, sir, for your candid interview. Moving right along to the next issue on the news. And, then the next day, you'll hear people saying, he's got red hair. He's got red hair. I mean, that's it. That's the debate that we have.
Or they'll say, today we're going to look at the question, does he have red hair or not?
Right, exactly, like it's actually something...
A valid question.
A valid question, yeah.
Exactly.
And then on some level it's deemed a valid question, and then we talk about it, and then it's like, okay, now we've looked at all sides of the he has red hair issue, and then we move along. And with nothing.
And the murder charges, his murder trial doesn't get covered.
Right. Yeah. It's just total. Yeah. It's all obfuscation, and all I could say is that it seems self-evident that people don't care, and that's okay. That's okay in this world, because no one wants to take the time to look at it anyway. And yeah.
Here at Seattle Center, we find, Craig and I, of course, think that this is a power spot, Seattle Center. We found lots of flying head drawings on the buildings nearby. And I've had a real fascination with the Space Needle for quite a few years. But here we notice that the Thunderbird totem pole is here, right next to the Space Needle. Look at that.
That's a pretty cool image. The totem pole with the Space Needle behind it.
Yeah. The natives would put a totem like this at a power spot. So the fact that this totem is here I mean, it would be interesting to look back at the history and find out how this got placed here.
Yeah, see where it actually came from.
It could have been there could have originally been a totem here.
Hey, speaking of those floating heads, did you see that article in The Stranger about them?
So you're saying that you saw an article in the Stranger magazine about those flying heads?
Yeah. There was an article about all those heads that we saw. You know, that was probably a good year ago when we really started to see them. And since then, you know, you can just go around town and they're everywhere. The guy's just like totally obsessive. So the story has it is that there was a guy in his mid-20s, I think, he was coming home sometime in the evening, and he witnessed a murder. He witnessed someone being killed, and he went and called the cops. And somehow, I don't know, I can't quite remember, like they didn't come, or they didn't respond fast enough. Somehow he did not feel like he got justice from the police establishment, or he didn't feel that the police did all that they should have done. And so he just kind of became totally obsessed with seeing this sort of unrequited murder. So he started doing these things, and at first I think he just started writing killers, you know, Killerz, killers. Cold killers, that's it. Cold killers. And then after that, then he started writing cold killers, and he said that he wanted to he said to him they were like ghosts. He just wanted to, you know, have some sort of otherworldly thing going on with his little Cold Killers logo. So then he started doing these little disembodied heads, or sort of Pac-Man forms, you know, that kind of thing. And so then sometimes it's just, so now he just says he's been doing it for, you know, a year or so, just all over town. And so it's either Cold Killers, or it's Cold Killers with the head, body, ghost thing, or it's just the ghost thing in and of itself, and they're just everywhere. The guy is just like obsessive.
Why is he using a paranormal, you know, coloring to that? Why is he looking for a ghosty explanation?
A ghost image?
Yeah, you said they were ghosts to him, and that,
they were ghosts.
That's evocative of the paranormal to me, and I'm wondering if,
or I mean, it's pretty standard iconography for death or the other world. You know, I don't know. Maybe he's on some subconscious level, you know, like channeling this person's, not channeling like he's that person's spirit, but it's like an homage to this person who has died. You know, like spirit, he's gone on to the spirit world. Spirit. Cold Killers, here's your spirit. Cold Killers, here's your spirit. I really can't say, you know, why he's doing it.
He's actually haunting the city in a way.
He's haunting right, exactly. There you go. That's very good. I like that. He is haunting the city with his obsession over this event. Yeah, he was so affected by this event, he is bringing it to everyone.
We're back at the Space Needle. It's about 15 minutes until the rally's supposed to begin, and we've walked around here for an hour and a half and still haven't found any evidence of where this rally would be. Craig thinks it's just it's just bureaucratic bungling. I'm not so sure. They've had a shift change, and the first girl who said that there was a talk and was getting our information is now gone. So there's still no luck here finding this rally. You'd think a presidential candidate would get at least a poster, one little poster somewhere, you know, if the place they're having a rally. Not so in America, not so. We've just learned that it's in the northwest rooms. Craig, where do you come down on the 911 issue? Do you think it was an inside job now that we're looking back at it for, how long's it been? Two years? 3 years?
2001, 2004, yeah, 3 years. It's just too Where do I come down?
Is it too hard to keep track of all those hijackers?
That's right. That's right. No, it is to. I choose to remain ignorant, if that is what not believing that it is a conspiracy would be called. It's too. That would be too sad to actually embrace the fact that it was a self-inflicted wound. That would be. I can't go there. It's too much for me. So beyond that, I have no idea. I'm totally with everything else. It's like, why, if this horrible person Osama bin Laden did this, why is he still free? Running around. If if they're so happy to kill everybody else, why haven't they killed him? They know where he is. So what's the big deal? There's so many questions and contradictions and bizarre things going on around it that there's certainly it begs for a lot of answering. Why do you support Nader?
Yeah, I'm part of the socialist alternative.
Why do you support Nader?
Because he's the only guy who has a chance on having a third party.
And what do you say to those folks out there that are? It seems like that you're being pressured. Nader supporters are being pressured into feeling guilty about taking votes away from the Democratic candidate.
Well, Kerry and Bush have very similar policies, and really Nader's for the working person. And in order for us to have a party that supports the working people, we really need to support Nader. In addition to that, the reason why all the votes don't go to Kerry or Bush, it goes strictly to Nader. And last election, there are other reasons besides strictly swapping votes why Bush got elected or why Gore did not get elected. There are other reasons why.
One of the reasons I've thought of, and one of the things I've been researching, is the 911 thing. And it appears that there's evidence that administration, like Republican officials knew something about it, or perhaps were. There are a lot of questions still surrounding 911, and I wonder.
Absolutely.
Does the typical Nader supporter, do you think, if they were if they were shown evidence that the Bush administration was involved in 911, would it change? Do you think it would make a difference in that the strategy to how do I say this? Do you think they would still support Nader, basically? I mean, do you
Absolutely.
think that? Yeah. And so, do you not believe that the strategy is worth? Do you believe the story? You must not believe that the story that you're taking votes away is true.
It's not true.
Right. Okay.
Yeah. In order for us to have a chance of having a third party, we really need to back.
Do you think they're just taking poll numbers and sort of playing?
Well, it's more than
with
just that. I mean, there's strategies like, for example, last election where in the Florida scandal, where actually the governor blocked off, prevented people from voting.
Yeah.
And that's just one other example why Bush got elected or why Gore did not. And so there's these other examples. It's just not swapping votes. There's other factors involved.
Do you think the average Nader supporter would rather just let him, if they're assuming their vote does help Bush, do you think they're willing to take the risk? It's okay if he has another 4 years, it's not so bad?
Yeah, if we vote for the Democratic Party right now, it just sends them a message that what they're doing is okay. And so really to get away from that is to really vote for the third party, and Nader's the only chance.
Perceptions about what socialism is. So it's kind of, plug in the cause.
Would you like to plug socialism?
Would I like to plug socialism?
On camera?
Okay.
Yeah.
What is socialism? For me, at core, it's the idea of a planned economy. Okay. It's the idea of organizing our society around rationality. Like right now, market forces control things like where food goes. There's millions of tons of food that get burned and destroyed every year. The camera makes me nervous. It's okay. But anyway, there's millions of.
I put myself on the camera all the time. I could just talk right into it. So.
But millions of. Hey,
I also screw up a lot.
I can watch myself actually. But
well, yeah, upside down.
Yeah, you could.
Millions
Oh no, it's right side up.
Yeah, okay. There's millions of tons of food that get burned and destroyed, and farmers are paid millions of dollars to not grow on arable land to regulate market prices. And meanwhile, there's starvation problems in the third world. It's just totally backwards.
Yeah, I've heard it said that it's not really a population problem with food, that it's a distribution, inequitable distribution problem.
Completely, yeah, exactly. And I think that's, just one small example. There's things like phased obsolescence, making products that are designed to wear out and break, spending millions of dollars on trying to figure out ways to inject more air into ice cream. I don't know, it's just a ridiculous waste of resources. And a planned economy, I think, would not be so wasteful.
Right.
Yeah.
How do you? Why Nader? Why are you a Nader supporter?
Why Nader? Because of what he represents politically. That it's not very often that you have a left-wing, third-party alternative that attracts as much support as he does. And basically, for me, elections, I think, it's really important to participate in them, but voting is a very passive activity. And
so for you, if Nader voters were to take away votes from Kerry, as they say, I'm not sure that's true or not, but let's assume that it is for a moment. Hypothetically, would you rather just see 4 years of Bush and stick to your guns with Nader and make that point, even if it means Bush gets 4 more years?
I think over time that's important, and that Nader, a person like Nader, or a campaign like the Nader campaign only comes around once so often, and it's so important to take advantage of that, to seize that, and to get involved in that, and to try to push politics forward in the country, which I think it really has a chance of doing. I think being quiet would be a big mistake. That in the end, the linkages that get made, and if George Bush is in office also, the left is united under that. We've seen under George Bush the biggest global protests, in history. And so, in a sense, even though it's really messed up, and it's he's doing a lot of things that people are reacting to, it has a positive effect too. If Kerry gets in office, okay, yeah, I'm okay with that too, in a sense that I think people need to become disillusioned with the Democrats and see that the Democrats get away with a lot of stuff because they're seen as a left alternative to Republicans. And it's really good, I think, in this election that so many people have put their hope behind Kerry, because when he gets in office, you're going to see he's pro-occupation, he's pro-corporate, he's going to go back on all his promises.
Do you think that Clinton got away with some things that Bush couldn't have gotten away with?
Oh, definitely. The Democrats under Clinton totally pushed free trade to new heights, and put a lot of hands in corporations to do the stuff they're doing now, outsourcing, exploiting.
So one of the things that struck me about Clinton was that he was successful in cutting welfare so much.
Right. Yeah, I know. It's funny.
Is that an issue for you? The welfare issue?
Yeah, definitely. But I think it shows what the Democrats can get away with.
Anything else you'd like to say about Nader? Or that you would say to people out there who are... Washington's not a swing state, right?
Right.
So, but let's say you're in a swing state and you want to vote for Nader. What would you say to that person to encourage them?
I'd say the Democrats need to wake up. If they lose now, it's just going to, hopefully push them further to the left. I think, by supporting Nader, you're only going to push things, even though in the short term it's going to seem like you're giving power to the Republicans and Bush is going to be in office. I think in the long run, it's just going to push everything towards the left. So people have to have a longer term perspective.
I've got one more question.
Sure.
A lot of the Bush agenda has been pushed forward by the 9/11 events. What's your feeling about the 9/11 events? Do you think that there was really some Muslim terrorists, or do you feel the official story is accurate?
I think so. I mean, if you're asking, do I think it was a conspiracy? Was it orchestrated?
No, not necessarily. Just do you think? I mean, the official story has sort of changed quite a few times, so
right.
I'm a little confused as to what it is even at this point.
I think they realized, well, I mean, the connections with Saudi Arabia. They realized it was politically very sticky, and when it happened, it's kind of like they needed to spin things in a certain way, and they also wanted to take advantage of it to do other things that they wanted to do. But
you don't think they're like maybe quote let it happen as people are saying?
No, I don't think so. It's
I'm filming him today.
Time to time.
Can I film?
Okay.
Go ahead.
I was just asking her if there were any of these that were, I guess, more succinct than others.
How many of you, apart from divorce lawsuits, how many of you have ever filed a lawsuit in your life? Let me see the hands. Now look around you. What would you say? What percent is that? Right. Flood of litigation? I said in your life. Now let's make it even easier. How many of you or your family has ever filed a lawsuit other than divorce suit? Does that look like a flood of litigation? Do you see what the big lie does of the Republicans and their corporatists and the tortfeasors lobby? And the Democrats do not defend. That's the problem. We cannot rely on the Democratic Party to defend our country against the worst Republicans who ever slithered or slimed into public office. For 10 years, the Democrats have been losing at the local, state, national level. They even lost an election they won in 2000. They even lost the congressional elections of 2002 because they took the hottest issue in the mass media that was vulnerable to the Republicans off the table. Corporate crime wave, Enron, WorldCom, all over the mass media. 401ks going down the tubes, pensions depleted, jobs lost as these crooked executives jump ship and collapse the corporations under them. Instead, they didn't mention it because they're dialing for the same corporate dollars. You don't bite the hand that feeds you. And then what they do? They anointed Bush by not stopping the war resolution, which is an unconstitutional assignment of Article 1, Section 8, to declare war to the president. Our founding fathers they're adamant, only the Congress can declare war. So they anoint him in October as a wartime president. And of course you can never criticize a wartime president, right? And he goes around beating up on their own candidates, like Senator Max Cleland running for re-election, who left 3 limbs in Vietnam. And there is no response. Because he's a wartime president. He's rising in the polls. What is the definition of decadence in its superlative form that can describe these sniveling political cowards who then turn around and say to people like you, you have no choice other than to stay home or vote for the least worst of the two parties? Because when you go through all these issues with the Democrats and you got them nailed on the evidence, boom, 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 their final resort is, do you know how bad the Republicans are? Boy, that's a rosy scenario for the future of American politics. Huh? The Democrats have not been given their due recognition for their decadence. I've been to the inner cities in this country where life is miserable by the hour. It's not only that it's poor, it's not only they don't get municipal services they deserve, police and fire, the way wealthier areas of the city get. It's not only that landlords don't have to obey the law for so many of these crumbling tenements with lead-based paint poisoning 200,000 kids a year. It's that the prosecutors don't pay attention to payday loans, 400 or 500% interest, no usury loans, rent-to-own rackets, predatory lending, redlining, the lack of credit unions, the lack of even the capacity to have banks that will open accounts. They have to go to these check cashing stores and lose 5% just to cash a check. Living in situations that the third world can be compared with. Hovels, homeless, freeze in the winter, come close to dying in the summer. Hunger, 13 million kids go to bed hungry every night. The school classrooms are so cold in the winter because it breaks down the heating system, they have to wear their overcoats and mitts. One of the students says, it's hard to write with mittens. And then there's the washrooms. Now to me, the washrooms in city schools is the ultimate canary bird of our abdication as elders. There are millions of children who hold it until after school because they're terrified of going to the washroom, being pushed around. And the plumbing is often broken. There are no towels, no soaps, no stalls. Vermin all over the place. Puddles of water on the floor. That's what they describe with their pictures, these fifth graders. The city announced they're going to demolish the school. The students did their job too well. They're going to reassign the kids, and they're not going to build a new school. So I say to the children, what did you come for? 6 months, publicity, documentation. What did you come for? I was pushing them with that. And you know how irrepressible kids are at that age. I mean, give me 10-year-olds in place of the White House press corps any day of the year. Okay? So I say, this to me was one of the most poignant moments of the campaign. So I don't want you to misunderstand it with a potential different kind of reaction. I said, what did you achieve? And a little girl stands up like this. We now have soap. Shame on us. Shame on us. All of us. Millions of kids like this. Having their imagination, their idealism, their curiosity, their hope for their future, and even their hope for the world as they come to understand it. This tormented world of ours, where 3 billion people are trying to make it on $2 or $1 a day, racked with disease, poverty, and brutality around them. This is the way we're treating these children. And every politician says he or she is for education. Oh, education, education. Hypocrites, immobilized politicians in their sinecure, receiving their nice salaries by government checks that never bounce. I blushed with shame. I could hardly respond to that little girl. I looked out the window, and there in the distance were the great skyscrapers of Chicago, whose motto is the city that works. And in those skyscrapers are executives making $3, $4, $5 million bucks a year. What am I going to say to our grandchildren and great-grandchildren? When at the tender age of 9, they're sitting on grandma and grandpa's knee, and they've just discovered that the world is in terrible shape. And in their searching gaze, they say, Grandma, Grandpa, where were you? What were you doing when the world was falling apart? What are we going to say to them? What are we going to say? Give them a chocolate bar? What are we going to say?
Said earlier that you felt like you were going to be on election night. You were going to have sort of be sitting there with a gun, with a gun in your mouth. So can you talk about like what sort of existential angst you're speaking of there?
I just feel that things have come to a hell of a pretty path. I don't. I'm actually kind of ambivalent about the election because, of course, you never know how things are going to turn out. When Bush was elected, I was inclined to give him the benefit of the doubt, and I soon felt that he had not earned my trust. Then when he gave his first State of the Union address, I thought, well, maybe this guy isn't so bad. He's saying all the right things. And then, of course, the truth underlying all of his statements came out, and they generally proved to be not exactly what he was saying or the exact opposite of what he was saying. And he's done that a few times. And then during the wrap-up for the Iraq War, I saw plain as day that he was just ramming it through over the objections of cooler heads. The way he plays to his base is so cynical. It's right out of the fascist handbook. I'm appalled that so many people don't see through it. And part of me thinks that maybe he should stick around for another 4 years to get all of the blowback that's due to him. And also, I think that if Kerry gets elected, what the Republicans will do to him will make their assault on Clinton look like a Tea Party. I think he'll be the lamest duck president we've ever had. I think he'll be incapable of achieving anything. He'll be dogged by accusations and calls for impeachment every step of the way. And maybe I think that Bush ought to win the election, catch all the shit that's heading his way, and wise people up to that branch of the Republican Party which has been co-opted by these neo-fascists, and recognize their tactics and abjure them forever. I don't have any particular confidence in Kerry, and I certainly don't have any confidence in anybody on the political scene. There's no truth anymore. There's no way you can judge anything or assess anything or believe anything. The Republicans have made such an art out of muddying the waters in order to cover up their own misdeeds that they've sacrificed any sense of clarity or ability to judge that there might have been. So I think that things are terrible. It seems like a prelude to some sort of total political disaster. God only knows what. And as far as Ralph Nader goes, I think he's like Lyndon LaRouche. He's a complete non-contender. Even if there's some freakish change of events, he was made president, he couldn't govern because he's too much at odds with the system. He's an untested pragmatist who I don't think is capable of playing ball in the world the way it needs to be played, and I think he would be like, it would end up being a cross between Jimmy Carter and Al Gore. I think he would just go down in flames. I don't think he's got the stomach for it, and I don't think he's got the political savvy or the pragmatism for it. And as far as the media goes, I don't know what to think about the media. They're so, when I listen to Fox TV or right-wing radio, they sound like they're in the employ of the government. They just seem like a wing of the Republican administration. I listen to NPR and Pacifica, who are obviously left-wing, but at least they give time to conservative points of view, and they don't heckle or ridicule them or try to distort what they're saying. They just let them have their word, which I think is a mature and adult thing to do, especially when you have an agenda. But there was a thing on NPR today on This American Life where the guy was discussing the things that the Republicans have done versus what the Democrats have done in order to mess up the voting registration of the other side. And there's some, according to this guy at least, and God only knows if it's true. You used to be able to have some sense of whether or not these things are accurate or not. But the Republicans have had this incredible systematic disenfranchisement of all of these me is, I don't know. I don't know what to think. I guess that's getting away from the question of the media. I think the media are not serving the American people very well. I think they're not just reporting what's going on. They were, don't forget that television is what went a long way towards ending the Vietnam War, and I'm amazed that the media has just rolled over and let this administration tell them what they can or can't show. I'm surprised they haven't smuggled people in there. I'm surprised they don't just show pictures of the coffins. That weird little debacle for debate. I don't know. I think the media has done a bad job of informing people. But then again, this has turned into a situation where there's two sides to everything, and people just believe what they want to believe, as always, and there's no consensus at all.
Yeah, it seems like there's no consensus on some basic moral issues or things that you could then build a rationale for choosing from.
Yeah, it seems that way to me. Or, if you hear that, anything you hear, you hear some fact reported, you hear that, Kerry won 2 Purple Hearts and a Gold Star or whatever he won. And then you hear that he injured himself to get the Purple Hearts and that he was a coward who shot people in the back and then his men hated him. And then you hear that he was a hero and his men loved him, Whatever you hear, there's the exact opposite out there. And you just don't have any way of knowing what the truth is. Even if you go into fact-checking, there's different fact-checker services that have different conclusions. So, how much independent research can you do? And the result is that things that should be scandals, that should be looked into, that should be problems. I think the conduct of Bush people at these Bush rallies, making people sign loyalty oaths, the Secret Service harassing people and dragging people away who are protesting, that's right out of the fascist handbook. That should be... I'm amazed that they can get away with it, but it's just one detail in a sea of things going wrong, and so it just passes. They just go by. Can you understand that? Can you explain that? Do you know what's happening? Don't forget Clinton was hounded and railroaded for a real estate deal in which he lost money and for getting a blowjob and trying to keep it from his wife. He was impeached for that. Look at the shit Bush is accused of doing, and there's nothing. He's been accused of numerous things which could be considered completely, subverting the American democratic process, if you want to call it that. And people just scratch their heads and go, gee, I wonder. What's going on?
The history of Bush is interesting because if you look back at how the Bush dynasty got started, a lot of the help came from the Harrimans, who, if you trace the Harrimans' history, it sort of connects up with the old Tories of the Revolutionary days, the British Empire, and so it something you had said reminded me of that. What did you say? Something about what was it? The things he was
saying that they seem to be able to get away with these terrible accusations being leveled at them, these credible things, and nothing ever happened.
Oh, it was a subversion. You mentioned that it was almost like he was subverting something about America, and I think if you look at the history of the backing that comes down that pike, if you will, that sort of that line of it's the New York banking world. There's a thread of if you look back into history, it goes back to the British Empire, and it goes back to some Swiss elements, some Masonic orders connected to the Swiss bankers. Anyway, there's something about it. People who have written books on treason have actually mentioned the Bush family and that whole lineage as being, connected with Aaron Burr. Who was the guy that shot Aaron? Was it Aaron Burr?
Aaron Burr shot who? Alexander Hamilton?
Yeah, the whole Burr connection. Those were Tories, and those Tories, have stayed around, and they've been there ever since. And there's a whole interlocking network of spies and financiers, MI5, MI6, and FBI and the CIA. And anyway, that's just one. It just it's something that hasn't really come out. They've talked about the Nazi connections and how the grandfather was helping the Nazis finance things during the war, and that all was big news at the time.
Yeah, well, I'm not sure that really matters. I'm not sure that the history of the Bush family matters much, unless you go back to, the political ascendancy of George Bush Sr. That's where it starts becoming relevant. The history of George Bush himself. Did you read that Howard Dean book called Worse Than Watergate?
No.
He seems like an objective guy, although he's got an axe to grind. And he documents he details Bush's, George Bush Jr.'s history of his life, and he seems like one of the least fit people to be president that I've ever heard of. And he's certainly acted like it since he's been in office.
Yeah.
So, these people are just opportunists and psychologists, and they have got... One of the things, there's two things that astound me. One is how little play has been given to the Project for a New American Century, in which the advisability of attacking and taking over Iraq even on a made-up pretext is spelled out in black and white. And the other thing that amazes me is the extent to which, when people are talking about Bush and everything, nobody says, under the guise of republicanism and conservatism, you have these corporate fascists who see the world in corporate terms and do everything with an eye towards business. I mean, there's no doubt that George Bush never does anything for anybody that doesn't involve money. He doesn't try to keep the air clean. He doesn't try to keep the public airways public. He doesn't try to do anything for people that involves quality of life that is, that has to do with the natural world or anything but money. It's all about making it easier for big companies to do bigger business. Everything he does is aimed at that. Absolutely everything. That is his only guiding principle. So he never says, people's lives would be better if they're they had more parks, or if their air was cleaner, if there wasn't mercury in the water, or if they had, decent health insurance. It's all about, it fits in with this. When did it become the all-justifying rationale for anything done in business that the stockholders and the shareholders have to be regarded? It used to be people would talk about the rights of the workers. You never hear that anymore. It's all about the rights of the shareholders, If some big company fires 25% of their employee force, well, we have to look out for the interests of the shareholders. And you never hear anybody say, well, what about the rights of the workers? That is an obsolete concept these days. It never comes up. And you can justify absolutely anything by saying, well, we had to look out for the interests of the shareholders, as if they were the only people in this equation whose opinions mattered. When did that happen?
We are here, Election Day 2004, November 2nd, with Levecke Mas, who's agreed to speak with us. She is a precinct captain for the Kerry campaign.
Well, this is the Election Day walk list, and on this list are all the names of people in Precinct 1941, which is a pretty small precinct. And these are names of people who are registered to vote, but maybe didn't vote in the last primary or election, or are newly registered voters, and it's not a sure thing that these people are going to get out and vote.
Who generates this data? How do you figure out who didn't go last time?
This was given to me by the people at the Kerry campaign, and they must have access. I don't know, how they access this database. I don't have to get that. So I don't actually know that.
What was that vibrating thing?
I don't know. So So anyway, and then on this list, basically, we go through and knock on every door and talk to the people that are on this list to...
You're busy. You're a precinct captain.
You know, our work never ends. You know, it starts at 6:30 in the morning, and then it doesn't end until after the polls close.
So you're supposed to be out there late tonight.
Yeah, I will.
Giving people food who show up at 8 o'clock, 7:59.
Yep.
And look at this weather. I mean, it's a rainy and cold day.
It's really wet. It's really, and
it's about as bad as it gets in Seattle.
Definitely.
Without
There's
it being
huge
a
puddles in the street. I was driving along and there was so much water on one road, and there was these two kids going to school, and I swear I splashed them, and I really didn't mean to. Sorry. So anyway, so what happened was at 9:30 this morning, I went to the polling station, and what's kind of amazing to me is I have an official letter that says, hey, this is what I'm doing, and, you know, give me information. But I really didn't have to show the letter, and I didn't really have to show any ID. I just kind of walked up and was very pleasant and introduced myself and said, hey, I'm, you know, a volunteer for the Carey campaign, precinct captain for 1941. I'd like to look at who signed in. And they're like, okay.
So even if you were Muslim, you could just walk right in.
You know? Yeah. Even if I was a terrorist with a, you know, with a scarf on.
As long as you fit into the team strength.
You know, I'm white and a woman, so I was pretty non-threatening, and showed up, and they gave me access to the list of when you just first sign in. And so then I went through the list and compared it to all the names of the, you know, iffy voters on here, and if that person had already showed up to vote, cross them off. We don't have to worry about them anymore. When we knock on doors and phone, we don't have to call them anymore. And also did a tally of just how many people have voted in this precinct as of 9:30 a.m., and it was 34.
There's something about the two-party system that's nice. You know, with the ease of access that people have to these records and to one's political views. In a two-party system, you know, you're relatively safe. You know, no one's going to go out and purge half of the population because of their political views. But if you had several political parties, the parties with the very small numbers would be probably be you know, this kind of information would get passed around, and these people might be targeted for negative experiences.
I'm a little uncomfortable with this list. I didn't know that this list existed. I didn't know that people had such access to information. I'm a little clued out on how available information is.
Is there
I'm
DNA
a little disturbed by it.
Is there DNA typing mentioned?
No, and there's not like sexual preference, you know, marital status. Male, female, age is on here, your age, and when you registered to vote is on here. So, and your phone number, and your address, and your full name, and...
Wow, phone numbers and addresses.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, and you know, right off the bat, I've got a pretty good picture of some of these people if I was into, you know, gaining information for a negative reason. I kind of got my foot in the door here with this list.
You mind if I borrow that list for a few minutes?
No. It's precinct captain. I cannot hand that list over to you. So pretty much right now I'm just supposed to go through and call people. We've already knocked on doors. Most people are, of course, at work, paying their taxes and earning money to send to the federal government. And I'm going to go back to the headquarters at 12:30 and meet for lunch. And then my next big thing isn't really till 3:30 when I go back to the polling station and do a new count, a cumulative count of how many people have voted, and cross off names again. And then once people, you know, are coming home from work, really hit them up, make sure they're voting, and then show up at the polls at 7:45 with coffee and food that I pick up at the headquarters, and encourage people to stay in line and thank them for coming out to vote.
First, I'd like to for you to address that team strength idea, and if you feel like how that is manifested in the campaign, and in general, just talk about your own personal politics.
Well, I mean,
if that's okay.
let
If
me
you can do
start
that.
with your second question, which was my own personal politics. And John Kerry had my vote before I even knew who was going to be leading the Democratic ticket. I knew that I would vote for anybody but Bush. So, I mean, before John Kerry even was nominated, I already knew that I would vote Democratic. And then actually when I watched the first presidential debate, I thought, oh, okay. I actually don't feel too bad about voting for him. And I'm really new to the whole process.
So you felt like Kerry did the best in the debates?
Actually, yeah. I mean, if I had been an undecided and had to choose between Bush or Kerry, and had gone and started the presidential debate undecided, I watched all the debates and I think Kerry was clearly. I mean, he seemed very presidential and poised and could speak clearly and thoughtfully and answer the questions. And Bush just looked like a shifty-eyed liar the whole time. He's darting around and looked like he was a liar. He made me uncomfortable, and I don't like his phony accent, and I don't like his religion dragging into it. I don't think that has any bearing. So, I mean, that's kind of sketchy stuff, and I'm very new to the whole thing. I voted for the first time in the 2000 election as a new, because I got my citizenship in July 2000, and then voted for the first time in November 2000.
And you were Canadian?
Mm-hmm.
You are Canadian still? Dual?
In my heart, I'm Canadian.
Do you have dual citizenship, though? Or how does that work?
I don't rightly know how it works, because when I took my oath of citizenship, I was supposedly releasing any claim to any foreign countries. But, I have a Canadian birth certificate, and that's where I was born, and it's always an option to go back there at any time. And both my kids are Canadian citizens.
So if Bush were to win, would you consider moving back to Canada, or is that, some people have talked about that?
Yeah. Well, no. It would take a lot more for me to move back to Canada.
What would it take? Roadblocks? Road checks?
I'm not sure what it would take. I
National
haven't
ID.
really given that any thought. I'm not sure what it would take for me to move back to Canada, because I've been here for 20 plus years, and so this is my new home. I've been my whole adult life here, so I really associate myself with America a lot more than
So you
Canada.
you have a pretty objective view then of our process. What's your feeling about our political
I don't bring
process?
a lot of the baggage with it that a lot of other people bring, because hold on, important precinct business. Let me just make sure. Yeah, that is okay. Not important precinct business. Yeah. Anyway, so I don't bring a lot of like old history stuff that a lot of people bring to their decisions with me, because a lot of it is a little unknown to me, and so.
What about the differences between Canada and America? I know in Michael Moore's movie, Columbine movie, he talks about how the media in America glorifies violence, yet in Canada it doesn't. So, and you have a real difference in cultures. In Canada, people don't lock their doors, even still, and yet in America, can you comment on that at all?
I don't have any, it's not fact-based in any way, just my own, perceptions. Is definitely, Americans love their guns and weapons, and...
But do you think it's the Americans, or do you think it's the media? Do you think that people's values are really fueling the media that much? Because to me it seems like, yeah, there are a few yahoos, and I'm sorry to cut you off.
Sorry,
I'll let you speak.
Question. I have to answer your call.
That's fine.
Hello? Yes. Oh, great. Okay, thanks for calling, Patrick. I'll see you in a little bit. Bye. That was Patrick, one of the canvassers who's walking in this neighborhood right now, and he found another page that he hadn't seen that he has to walk through. So after he does that, he's going to come by and give me his information.
But let me clarify it again.
Okay.
Moore was saying that there really wasn't a difference in the people. This is my interpretation, that the people were pretty similar. You cross the border there in Bellingham, or
Right.
people are people. But in America, the media is focused on the violence for some reason, and who knows why. It sounded like to me it had to do with money. It was his position was, these people that sell the guns and make money off of war like to have violence in the media all the time because it helps that process along. So I just wanted to clarify what I think he was saying.
Well, it's hard because I haven't spent much time as an adult in Canada, so my perceptions are different. But just in general, Canadians they're not so. They're much more polite and follow the rules. I always joke that I'm Canadian, I don't jaywalk. Nobody jaywalks. It's just, we just follow the rules. Maybe it's the British thing, I don't know, but we follow the rules, and a lot of Americans just love to break the rules in my perception. They just really are that outlaw mentality, which is, seems to me a big part of a lot of American culture, is that Wild West outlaw kind of mentality. And we don't have that in Canada. We don't have any outlaw history and the rebel and the wild person.
But you'd think that you'd have people escaping into the mountains of the north, scofflaws, running from the law. Down in Louisiana and the swamps down there, that's where a lot of, in eastern Texas, that's where a lot of scofflaws went. So you have this, in Texas especially, you have this, Wild West mentality even more, because there's so many of those escapees down there.
That's not my
but you didn't get that
perception
in Canada.
Growing up, and and ongoing as I go back to spend time with my family and just kind of what's going on. There's funky stuff and bad stuff everywhere. Canada's not immune. There's all kinds of weird stuff going on. It is an entirely different country, an entirely different way of looking at things and approaching the media, and I really think media does glorify the violence because that's the bottom line. The bottom line is money.
What were your feelings about 911, not being an American citizen, yet living here? Just very sad. Just really horrified that it happened, and just really sad for the family members. I didn't really think about anything beyond, just a lot of sadness. I didn't really have a lot of fear for the future or ongoing concerns, and I didn't know anything about any conspiracy theories till I talked to you. But did you see Michael Moore's movie? Fahrenheit 9/11.
I did. I went by myself. Charles wouldn't go with me, so I went and saw it by myself as a matinee, and I pretty much, from about, halfway through the movie, I just sat there in the theater kind of crying. It was really sad. And I just found the mother really sad. And there's just so much pain, a lot of pain. And actually, it's probably why I said that I would do something today. Was because I was kind of thinking back to that movie, and I thought, wow, if that's what's going on, I don't think, you can't just say, I guess you have to make more of an effort to participate if you think there's a problem.
You mean like, are you referring to the Bush-Saudi connection and all that stuff? Because that would bear on this election. That would be a reason to go out.
Yeah. Yeah. I think...
the last election, that whole thing.
Right. And just Bush's... you can take in all that information about his activity or his inactivity and being unresponsive and not taking care of things well and jumping into Iraq and all that, and you can complain about it, but then I guess what I took from that movie is I guess it's not enough just to complain about things. If you think there's a problem, you have to take some action and do what you can. And so kind of doing this today, and then I'd like to do more in the future. This is the beginning.
Any thoughts on the vote fraud we've heard about in the early going here of the election? Some preloaded Republican votes, some missing ballots in Florida. Any thoughts on all that from your perspective inside a campaign?
No, I need to find out more information before I really know. I guess
some of the things that
innocent.
happened in the 2000 election with the disenfranchisement activities, all that. I mean, is there Canadian vote for fraud? I mean, does that go on?
I don't know. I don't know either way.
Okay.
Being out of the country and involved, I guess for me, I'm just so much thinking that everybody's moving along doing the right thing all the time. It's really hard for me to grasp the concept of, stealing votes and people shredding Democratic voter registrations or any of those things that go on. It's just really hard for me to conceive of that because, like I said, I mean, I don't even jaywalk. I follow the rules. There's rules and I follow them, and it's really hard for me to think that that's really going on. People are doing that, and it's very innocent and naive. But so I guess I need to find out, hear a little bit more about what's going on. But it's very scary. Let me find that here in my stack of papers. They're all stuck together. That's right. I'm precinct 11-1941. And the total number of names that I crossed off my list were 9. And the total number of people who voted for the precinct were 34.
So the amazing, you said there were some amazing things, and we talked about the fact that everyone's information is on this list. Was there something else about it that you found amazing? The structural organization of the whole enterprise?
I mean, with computers, none of this detail work really surprises me. But what I just find so amazing is that they have access to all of this information, and it's just kind of given out to people who've stepped up and volunteered, but people don't really know my background or whether, my reasons for participating are underhanded. And, so there's that. And then the other part is just to think that what I'm doing is just for my precinct, and that the hall that I went to find information was just for precinct 11 and 37, or district 11 and district 37, and that I felt like there were 600 people there that night showing up to volunteer, and that's going on throughout the city of Seattle and beyond, everywhere, that people are showing up to volunteer
to choose between two wings of the business party.
Yeah. I mean, John Kerry, what's he going to do? I don't know, but he's just not going to be George Bush.
Do we have right. There is a difference between an empire with a glove on the fist versus no glove on the fist.
Yeah.
Definitely.
So
I've heard there's a war among the elites between a debate, I'd say, between having the glove on and the glove off. That's about the difference in terms of how we run our global operation, military operation.
Well, I think that John Kerry's going to win today, but whoever wins, if it's not John Kerry, if it's George Bush, whatever happens, there's going to be court issues. There's going to be fighting, and it will further divide the country, and people outside the country will continue to lose respect for America.
Thoughtfully that way. That way. How are you feeling right now?
Well,
Got to put it real close to hear you.
the pressure is on now because when you say that, I lose my whole focus. But
Because people will be looking at the camera.
yeah.
I'm sorry.
So,
Don't forget about
what
it.
was I saying? Oh yeah. So, in my perception is that people in America are apathetic about voting and don't exercise their right that people in other countries are willing to die for. Yet, it's kind of cool to look around a room and say, okay, here's a bunch of people who are, decided to give one day out of their life and actually, show up and do something. You know, I think it's pretty cool.
But I'll have to hold the camera close to hear you, but
Okay.
because of the noise in here. But
Okay.
today you were barred from going down the street, and you're
Well,
a you're a canvasser, right?
I was canvassing for the Kerry campaign, and I had my list of addresses. And as I started to go down the street, I was challenged by two people in a car who told me I could not walk down that street because it said private drive. And I said, well, I'm going to a public address. And they said, but you can't go down the street because this is a private drive. And I said, I'm going to a public address. Are you Bush supporters? And they looked at each other like, oh, you know, but they didn't say anything. And they just kept repeating that it was a private drive and I couldn't go down there. And so I just walked down the street anyway and went to my address and left the literature to remind the person to vote. And then I came back to about an hour later, we went back to the polling place, and and I was standing in the room there observing the process, and these same two people came over to me and demanded my name. Said, who are you? We want your name. And I said, well, who are you? What's your name? And he wouldn't give me his name. He said, we're the people who saw you going down the private drive. And I said, well, I don't have to give you my name. And they said, well, we want your name. And I said, well, my name's George Smith. And so then he started to write it down, and his wife said, that's a fake name.
But they wouldn't reveal who they were supporting, right?
No, they didn't say anything.
But they wanted your name.
They wanted my name, and I thought they didn't have any right to it, and so I didn't give it to them. And so then they walked away just huffing and puffing to each other about it all.
Can you briefly give just a short description of why you're a Kerry supporter?
I'm a Kerry supporter because I am very pleased with his general stance on health care, on the tax structure in this country, and on the fact that it was a terrible mistake to go into Iraq, and we do have to clean it up now, but it was a terrible mistake to do that. And I think that in his entire life he has shown that while he will go to war if he feels that it is necessary to defend this country, he will also stand up and say when he thinks that there has been a mistake that has been made, and it is an unnecessary and wasteful and dangerous thing to do. And so I think he has a lot of integrity. I don't know. I think this is a great election because I'm suddenly surrounded by people who realize that it really does make a difference. And all my life I've been trying to convince people that it makes a difference that they vote and that they take their vote seriously. And a lot of issues make a real difference. And it's wonderful now to realize that this is sort of now the national consciousness, that it makes a tremendous difference who you vote for, and that you pay attention to the issues and educate yourself, and that it impacts our lives every day.
You were saying earlier that you thought that this election would be about there would be some hanky-panky and things.
Oh, I think the real issue with this election is about the disenfranchisement of many and the misinformation campaigns and other things that have been manipulating our votes for a long time, and we've been ignoring it. And the Electoral College is part of that. But this is I'm hoping this is going to be, an ongoing campaign to continue to mobilize the minority votes and the less wealthy section of the population, and the young people and people who have been apathetic and also highly misinformed. So I think also this is an election where people could get very mobilized about the role of the press. And the fact that only 5 people own the press in this country at this point and have been manipulating us and manipulated us into the war. So
what about the vote counting company?
Oh, this business about not even having a paper trail and being, having...
The national vote is counted by a private company, and Pat Robertson's on the board.
Yeah, I think that's outrageous. So I think all of this is really important, and it's going to take millions and millions of people to stay involved in order to stop, this takeover by the Republicans.
the good thing about the hanky-panky is it's going to bring focus to these issues.
Yeah. And there's plenty of work to do. Just tons of work to do.
We want you to get out there and hit the road. Start knocking on doors. Okay, the first thing I want to tell you is that no surprise to anyone, there is trickery going on within our district. There is misinformation being given out. There are games being played, suddenly shutting down polling locations. Folks, this is what it's all about. This is why you're here. We're going to get out the vote despite every effort to stop us.
I'm here today with noted Seattle Buddhist Leisha Diane, and she's going to talk about the phenomena of it's the mind of the voters. The voters, especially the Democratic voters, and even from both sides, we've all got this vision of George Bush. Go ahead. But talk. If someone were to ask, well, I'll let you say it.
Well, we all, there is no inherently existent George Bush, which is why we all have different experiences of George Bush. Some people like George Bush and some people don't like George Bush. And that is because there is no inherently existent George Bush. We have the collective karma to have George Bush as our president, but if we were to go look for a George Bush that's separate from our mind, we wouldn't find an inherently existent George Bush.
Who would Jesus bomb? Sorry.
Who would Nobody.
Any other thoughts? I mean, we were talking earlier about fear, people being afraid of the election and what a George Bush presidency would bring.
Well, I guess what we have to remember is that if we realize that George Bush is not out there, then if he's reelected again, we can change things even though George Bush is president, because George Bush is he's just an aspect of our minds. So if we change our minds, we can change the world.
See the pure being in George Bush?
Yeah, I mean, we could.
What's behind the boisterous cowboy?
Yeah, maybe if we started to relate, I mean, this is kind of far-fetched, but if we were to relate to George Bush's good qualities, then maybe we could draw those good qualities out of him, because there's no inherently bad person. There's no inherently good person. It's like, so if we can see everybody has good qualities and everybody has faults, if we just focus on their faults, then that's what is going to appear to us. But if we can focus on his good qualities, then that is what will appear to us. And if we can just realize that we've created the karma to have this kind of president, then we can engage in actions to purify that karma. And then maybe that won't happen again in the future.
If there happens to be a protest tonight, let's say there's some rude counting or something that goes on, and there's some fraud, and I've already uncovered some fraud today, just speaking with canvassers. That means if there is a protest tonight, that as we tear stuff up, we should say,